In a 2014 interview to Guardian, Nicolas Maduro, the Venezuelan president, said that I never aspired to be the president. He was rather a bit of a hippie who loved the Beatles. And yet, until being captured by the US President Donald Trump on Saturday and being flown away from his country, he was Latin America's longest serving president for 12 years. He has been described as eccentric and someone with no charisma. For Trump, he is the leader of a drug cartel. For Venezuelans, he is the eccentric leader who oversaw mass migrations and democratic backsliding amid a failing economy. Now, Venezuela on Saturday saw the biggest US military buildup and then strikes in decades, and at the heart of this crisis stands President Nicolas Maduro, a bus driver turned strongman whose rule saw an economic crisis, breakdown of civil military ties, and persistent allegations of state sponsored criminality. After months of strikes on Venezuelan docks and escalating US pressure, Trump Saturday morning declared that he had captured the Venezuelan president who had been flown out of the country. According to the US president, Maduro had been emptying prisons and psychiatric facilities while pushing inmates to migrate to the US and also used the country's oil revenues to fund drug cartels. Before his capture, Maduro on Thursday in an interview had said that he was willing to hold talks with Trump. In July, the US announced a $50 million bounty on Maduro's head, accusing him of being one of the largest narco traffickers in the world. But how did the longest serving president become a fugitive overnight? ThePrint looks at his history. Maduro first came to power in 2013 after having been picked as a successor by former president and military officer Hugo Chavez post his death from cancer. He had met Chavez as a union leader, and according to a CNN profile on him, Maduro is an eccentric who invents words in Spanish, celebrates Christmas 2 months early, and believes that his political father, that is Hugo Chavez, appeared in front of him as a bird and a butterfly. Now, this is where it began. Maduro began the post-Chavez era by expelling US diplomats, accusing historical enemies of poisoning the president, and labeling any kind of opposition as fascists who want to divide the country. In his presidential race, it was then that he claimed that the spirit of his father, Chavez, had visited him in the form of a bird, and he then invoked ancient tribal curses on his political enemies. But that is not all. He is mocked by Venezuelans for the democratic backsliding that his rule brought in the country, even as he became popular as the son of Chavez, who would take his legacy forward. Within the ruling United Socialist Party of Venezuela at that time, Maduro commanded only limited support, and his inner circle was reportedly locked in tense rivalry with the allies of Diosdado Cabello, who was the National Assembly president, over who should succeed Chavez in a moment of deep national uncertainty. That uncertainty ended in early December 2012 when a sick Chavez publicly and unequivocally anointed Maduro as his successor, silencing internal dissidents and recasting him as the son of Chavez. From that moment on, Maduro presided over a government that saw disputed elections, mass protest, sweeping sanctions, arrest warrants, rumors of military rebellion, diplomatic isolation, and a constant speculation about when it would be his political demise. Chavez, on his part, was a popular Venezuelan leader and had come to power and transformed Venezuela through his Bolivarian revolution using oil wealth to fund social programs that led to lesser poverty and greater access to education and housing. According to many reports, at the time of Chavez's passing, household poverty in Venezuela stood at 33.1%, while extreme poverty was at 11.4%. A decade later, under Maduro, those gains had unraveled. By 2021, poverty had surged beyond 80%, while extreme poverty had gone to more than 50% in the country. Coupled with that, Venezuela also became the source of the largest forced displacement crisis in Latin America. More than 7.7 Venezuelans fled the country, mostly to Colombia and Peru, while others went to US, which now hosts over 500,000 Venezuelan migrants. Maduro was born in a working-class family in Caracas and began his political life as a bus driver and a trade union activist. He then joined Hugo Chavez's movement in the early 1990s, campaigned for his release after a failed coup attempt in 92, and rose steadily through the ranks, becoming foreign minister, vice president, and finally Chavez's designated successor. He narrowly won the 2013 election and presented himself as the guardian of Chavez's legacy and a bulwark against US imperialism. He then went on to cultivate alliances with leaders such as the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Turkey's Erdogan, and Cuba's leadership, while increasingly relying on the military to secure power domestically. Under Maduro, Venezuela has shifted from Chavez's mass based participatory politics to a more military system where the armed forces have become central to governance. Senior officers were appointed to ministries, governorships, and state owned companies. According to a CNN report, estimates by analysts suggest that the military controls one-third of governor roles, a quarter of ministries, and at least a dozen public enterprises. In such a situation, elections under him also became increasingly contested. In 2017, the National Assembly, controlled by the Venezuelan opposition, was dissolved. The 2018 elections, too, were widely boycotted and criticized. Then, in 2019, opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself as interim president backed by the US, but Maduro still held on. He declared Guaido as an American puppet, and the government was eventually dissolved in 2023. The last elections were then held in 2024 in July, and former diplomat Edmundo Gonzalez was seen as the winner. But then, electoral authorities in Venezuela declared Maduro the winner despite no such evidence, and Gonzalez had to take asylum in Spain. Now, since 2019, more than 50 countries, including the US, have refused to recognize Maduro as Venezuela's head of state. The US has also imposed sanctions since 2017 on the Venezuelan oil company, and the EU has followed with an arms embargo. The sanctions on Venezuela's state oil company was eased in 2023 but was reinstated in 2024 when opposition leader Maria Corina Machado was barred from contesting elections. Even allies of Venezuela like Brazil and Colombia had eventually in 2024 refused to accept the electoral results. Maduro and his supporters blame the US oil sanctions as a reason for the economic collapse. Now, the US claims that Maduro is the head of a group called the Cartel of the Suns, which is a Venezuelan drug cartel comprising of high ranking military officials. But what is the Cartel of the Suns? Now, running parallel to Venezuela's political decay are long standing allegations that parts of the state, particularly the military, are embedded in organized crime through the group called Cartel of the Suns. Now, the cartel is not a single hierarchy but a network of cells inside the armed forces, which includes reportedly the Army, the Air Force, Navy, and National Guard, and they are involved in drug trafficking, illegal mining, gasoline smuggling, and corruption. The name for the group comes from the sun insignia, which is worn by senior officers who were first accused of trafficking in the 1990s. By the mid 2000s, military elements had allegedly moved from extortion to direct cocaine trafficking using control over borders, ports, airports, and radar systems to guarantee safe passage. According to US estimates, again, cocaine transiting in Venezuela rose from 50 tons in 2004 to 250 tons in 2007. Under Maduro, these scandals reportedly multiplied. In 2013, French authorities seized 1.3 tons of cocaine from an Air France flight departing Caracas. In 2015, a former presidential security chief accused the senior ruling figure Diosdado Cabello of leading the cartel. Rather than investigate, Maduro only promoted several accused officials. Then, in 2020, the US indicted Maduro and top officials on narco-terrorism charges, accusing them of using state institutions to ship tons of cocaine. In 2025, the US designated the Cartel of the Suns as a terrorist organization and raised the reward for Maduro's arrest to $50 million. Several former senior officers even pleaded guilty in US courts. Now, it is against this backdrop that the largest US military build-up in the Americas has happened against Maduro since the Cold War. What began as US airstrikes on speedboats allegedly carrying drugs through Venezuelan waters has now expanded into operations across the Eastern Caribbean, the Pacific, and beyond, with more than 110 people reportedly being killed. US forces have also seized two sanctioned Venezuelan oil tankers, while a third is still being pursued. On Christmas last year, Trump even publicly alluded to the first land strike on Venezuelan soil ever But while details remain scarce, reports say it took place in Zulia, the oil rich western state that also features prominently in drug trafficking allegations. On Saturday, the escalation reached a new level when US officials confirmed strikes on sites in Caracas and military facilities, with footage of fire and smoke rising over the capital. Maduro responded by declaring a national emergency and denouncing what he called US military aggression. In a special communique, the Venezuelan government repudiated the attacks and called on its grassroots supporters and militias to mobilize nationwide. This is often seen as a familiar appeal to the socialist base that has actually sustained Maduro through the repeated crises along the years. Now, the Trump administration has also designated Venezuelan gangs, including Trendy Aragua, as terrorist organizations and has launched airstrikes on alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean. Trump repeatedly hinted at regime change, issuing an ultimatum in late November urging Maduro to step down in exchange for safe passage abroad. Maduro rejected the offer, telling his supporters that he would not accept a slave's peace and accused Washington of seeking control over Venezuela's oil. With Maduro now arrested and in US soil, what happens with him remains to be seen, but for now, Venezuela is in tough waters. This is Debdutta for The Print. Keep watching for more such videos.